The heavy oak door groaned shut against the rising wind, the iron bolt sliding home with a solid final thud. Outside, waves crashed against the granite foundation, a relentless roar that shook the very stones. But inside the tower, a different world existed. An oil lamp, held steady in Elias's weathered hand, cast long dancing shadows up the spiral staircase that coiled into the darkness above. The storm was a distant fury now, muted by thick walls. His nightly ritual was beginning, a slow, deliberate climb toward the one thing that mattered, the steady light waiting at the top. This was his purpose, his vigil, to keep the flame burning through the darkest hours, a single point of certainty in the chaotic night. He climbed the worn stone steps, each one familiar as an old friend. The air grew colder the higher he went, carrying the sharp scent of salt and the faint, oily smell of the lamp fuel. Reaching the lantern room, he placed his lamp on a hook and began his preparations. First, he checked the large reservoir of whale oil, ensuring it was full enough to last until morning. The dark liquid sloshed gently within its brass container. Next, he took up a soft, lint-free cloth and began polishing the great Fresnel lens. His movements were slow, circular, hypnotic. He wiped away every trace of salt spray and dust, each pass revealing more of the intricate glass prisms designed to capture and magnify the flame's humble glow into a beacon, visible for miles. This was a meditation. The feel of the cool glass under the cloth, the repetitive motion, it calmed the mind. Finally, he turned to the clockwork mechanism that rotated the entire light assembly. With a large brass key, he began the meticulous winding. The gears clicked and whirred softly, a gentle, mechanical heartbeat. He wound it until the spring was taut, ensuring the beam would sweep its faithful arc all night long. Then he took the flame from his hand lamp and carefully lit the main wick. A small, bright blossom of fire sparked to life. He adjusted the airflow, and the flame grew steady and strong. He watched as the lens gathered the light, bending and focusing it into a powerful beam that, with a deep, resonant hum from the mechanism, began its slow rotation. The first brilliant slash of light pierced through the stormy darkness outside the thick glass, a silent promise to the sea. The comforting rhythm was established, a slow sweep, a moment of darkness, then light again. This familiar ritual, performed night after night, always stirred something deep within him, pulling memories to the surface like treasures from the ocean floor. His mind drifted back to his first year as an apprentice keeper, a young man full of nervous energy. The old keeper, a silent man named Abram, had taught him every step of this ritual with a quiet patience Elias now understood. He remembered summer nights so still, the sea was like a vast sheet of dark glass, reflecting the countless stars above. On those peaceful nights, the light's work felt less urgent, more beautiful. He remembered his son, a small boy then, visiting during one such tranquil summer. He could still feel the weight of the child on his shoulders as he carried him up this very staircase, pointing out the constellations through the lantern room glass. That's the North Star, son. Steady as our light. Sailors use them both to find their way. The boy's awe was a brighter warmth than any flame. Those were happy times, the solitude feeling like peace rather than loneliness. The weight of the duty was balanced by the profound connection to something greater. The safety of unseen ships, the families waiting in distant ports. The solitude could be heavy, yes, a tangible presence in the long, quiet hours. But It was a weight he had learned to carry, a silence he had learned to fill with the rhythm of his work and the memories of calmer days. He felt the presence of all the keepers who had come before him, their vigilance woven into the very stone of the tower. It was a chain of watchfulness stretching back through the decades, and he was its current link. A particularly violent wave crashed against the rocks far below, the impact shuddering through the tower and jolting him back to the present. The storm was still very much alive. The memory of the calm summer sea faded, replaced by the immediate reality of the tempest raging outside the glass. The beam continued its sweep, a defiant eye staring into the gale. The storm was not relenting. If anything, it seemed to be gathering its strength, testing the resilience of the ancient stone tower. The wind howled around the circular structure with a voice like a living thing, a deep-throated roar that vibrated through the soles of his boots. It found every tiny crevice whistling a thin, high-pitched note that underscored the bass of the gale. Rain, driven horizontally by the ferocious wind, lashed against the thick glass panes of the lantern room. Each drop struck with the force of a tiny pebble, creating a constant rattling percussion that merged with the wind's symphony. Elias walked slowly around the circular room, his hand gently tracing the cold stone wall. He was checking for any signs of moisture, any trickle of water that would betray a leak. The walls were damp with condensation, but thankfully the masonry held firm against the onslaught. He returned to the center of the room, to the heart of the light. The great beam continued its slow, majestic rotation. As it passed through the torrential rain outside, the light transformed. It became a solid cylinder of illumination, made visible by the countless raindrops caught in its path. It was hypnotic to watch. The beam would sweep across the blackness, and for a moment it would reveal the chaotic, silver-streaked world of the storm, the driving rain, the frothing, white-capped waves far below, before plunging everything back into utter blackness until the next rotation. This cycle, this predictable rhythm amidst the chaos, was a profound comfort. But with each sweep of the light, his worry grew. He peered into the darkness between the flashes, searching for any sign of a ship. A mast light, a distress flare, to be caught out there tonight in such a tempest. It was a thought he pushed away, but it lingered at the edge of his mind like a shadow. His duty was not just to maintain the light, but to be a witness, to stand watch so that others somewhere on that treacherous sea might know they were not alone. The weight of that responsibility settled on him, a familiar and sobering cloak. He knew this was going to be a long night, a test of endurance for both the lighthouse and its keeper. The initial energy of the storm's arrival had passed, and now the true vigil began. The slow, patient waiting for the dawn that felt impossibly far away. He took a deep breath, the air cold and sharp in his lungs, and prepared himself for the hours ahead. The wind screamed its defiance, and the light answered with its silent, steadfast glow. The deepest hours of the night settled over the lighthouse, a time when the world outside seemed to hold its breath between the gusts of wind. The storm was still powerful, but a strange, heavy quietness descended upon the tower itself. The initial frantic energy had given way to a grinding, persistent endurance. Elias decided it was time to retreat briefly from the lantern room. He descended the spiral staircase, the sounds changing with each step. The howl of the wind grew more muffled, replaced by the closer, more immediate sounds of the structure itself, the creak of ancient wood, the groan of the stairs under his weight. He entered his small circular quarters partway down the tower. It was a Spartan space, dominated by a small fireplace built into the thick wall. A few embers still glowed red from the fire he'd lit earlier. He knelt and added a few pieces of dry split wood from the basket. He blew gently on the embers, and soon a new flame licked up, catching the wood. The crackle of the burning fire was a welcome, earthly sound. It joined the deeper, constant rhythm of the waves below, creating a new, more intimate soundtrack to the night. He held his hands out to the growing flames, feeling the warmth spread through his stiff fingers and up his arms. The heat began to push back the chill that had seeped into his bones during his long watch above. The room slowly filled with a soft orange light that danced on the curved stone walls, a stark contrast to the stark electric white of the beacon above. He filled a heavy clay mug from a pot of water kept warm by the hearth and dropped in a pinch of tea leaves from a small tin. He sat in his worn wooden chair, cradling the mug in his hands, feeling its warmth seep into his palms. He took a slow sip of the bitter, hot liquid. In this moment, surrounded by the simple, elemental comforts of heat and light, his mind turned inward. He reflected on the years of service, the countless nights spent in this very ritual. He thought of the storms weathered, the ships guided safely, the slow passage of time marked not by calendars, but by the wear on the stone steps and the lines on his own face. This was his life, a life of solitude, yes, but also a life of profound purpose. The fire crackled companionably, and the beam above continued its endless sweeping arc, a metronome counting the slow, peaceful moments of the midnight watch. The warmth from the hearth spread through the room and through him, a deep contentment tempering the fatigue of his long vigil. The sounds of the fire and the sea wove together into a lulling blanket of noise, a protective barrier against the fury that still raged outside the thick walls. Sitting there in the warmth, Elias never felt truly alone. The lighthouse was more than stone and mortar. It was a vessel of memory, inhabited by the ghosts of keepers past. He could almost feel their presence in the quiet moments, a faint impression in the worn spot on the floorboards where each had stood to tend a fire, a shadow that seemed to linger in the corner of the stairwell. Stories were passed down not in books, but in the very rituals of the place. Abram, the old keeper who taught him, had learned from a man named Silas, who in turn had taken over from his own father. Generations of watchers, each adding their chapter to the tower's long history. On a shelf near his chair lay the ledger, a thick leather-bound book filled with the names of every man who attended this light. Elias sometimes opened it, not to read the sparse notes about weather and oil levels, but to trace the faded signatures with his finger. Each name represented years of solitude, of vigilance, of quiet dedication. He felt their collective watchfulness woven into the fabric of the place, a silent companionship that strengthened his own resolve. They had all heard the same waves crash against the same rocks, felt the same wind shake the same walls, and kept the same flame burning through the darkness. Their vigilance was a legacy built into the stone, a promise kept across the decades. It was a comforting thought that he was part of this unbroken chain. The weight of the night felt lighter when shared, even with those long gone. Their spirits were in the rhythm of the light, in the smell of the oil, in the sound of the sea, a constant reassuring presence. As the fire settled into a steady glow, this sense of connection deepened, blending the past with the present, until the line between them felt thin and translucent. The warmth from the hearth seemed to carry more than just heat. It carried the accumulated peace of countless nights just like this one. And as he sat, lulled by this feeling of timeless continuity, his awareness slowly shifted from the echoes of the past to the immediate, tangible sensations of the present moment, to the simple reality of his body in this space, on this night. In the deep quiet of the midnight watch, his world narrowed to the input of his senses, each one offering a different thread in the tapestry of the night. The air he breathed was a complex mixture. The sharp, clean scent of the sea, a constant presence even inside the tower. The rich, slightly pungent smell of the whale oil from the lamp above, and the warm, woody aroma of oak and pine smoke curling from the fireplace. These smells mingled into a fragrance he knew as well as his own name, the very scent of safety and duty. His feet, clad in thick, worn wool socks, felt the perpetual chill of the stone floor seeping through, a cool contrast to the warmth spreading across his front from the fire. It was a grounding sensation, connecting him physically to the ancient rock on which the lighthouse stood. When he licked his lips, he could still taste the salt on the air, a faint metallic tang that spoke of the vast ocean just beyond the walls. The sounds layered upon each other in a soothing cacophony. Below everything, the deep, rhythmic boom and hiss of the waves provided a foundational bass note, a sound so constant it was almost like silence. Closer, right beside him, the fire crackled and popped, a more intimate and variable melody. And from above, faint but discernible, came the steady mechanical hum and click of the rotating lens mechanism, the heartbeat of the lighthouse itself. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to listen. The symphony of waves, fire, and clockwork wove together into a hypnotic blanket of sound that wrapped around him. When he opened his eyes, his gaze was drawn to the small, high window that looked out from his quarters. At regular intervals, the powerful beam would sweep past, slicing through the darkness. For a breathtaking second, the blackness outside would vanish, replaced by a brilliant fleeting glimpse of the torrential rain being driven almost horizontally. Then the light would pass, and the world would plunge back into an even deeper black until the cycle began again. This dance of light and shadow was mesmerizing. The sight of that steady, reliable beam cutting through the chaos was a visual anchor, a promise of order in a disordered world. These sensations, the smells, the feels, the tastes, the sounds, the sights, they were not merely observations. They were the elements of his reality, the components of a profound tranquility that existed here, in the eye of the storm. They pulled his mind away from the howling wind and towards a quieter, more internal space, a space where the fury outside became a distant rumor and the peace within became the only truth. His focus softened, turning inward and then outward again, toward the sleeping world that relied on his wakefulness. His thoughts drifted away from the stone walls and the immediate storm, reaching out across the black water toward the village nestled safely in the harbor. He could picture it so clearly in his mind's eye, a collection of dark, sleeping shapes huddled along the shore. The fishermen's boats, their sails tightly furled, would be secured with extra ropes against the docks, rocking gently but securely in the swells that made it into the sheltered cove. Behind the thick stone walls of the cottages, families slept soundly. Children were tucked safely under heavy wool blankets, unaware of the tempest raging just beyond their windows. Parents slept the deep, untroubled sleep of those who knew the light was burning, who trusted the steady pulse that cut through the darkness from the top of the distant cliff. The entire village was asleep, dreaming its quiet dreams, while he remained awake. The lighthouse stood guard, a solitary sentinel. This was the heart of his purpose, not just to warn ships of danger, but to enable this profound rest for others. His wakefulness was the price of their peace. It was a trade he made willingly, night after night. The thought wrapped around him like a warm cloak, a deep sense of meaning that made the solitude feel less like loneliness and more like a sacred duty. He was the guardian of their sleep, the keeper of the quiet. And in that role, he found a strange, reciprocal peace. The knowledge that his vigilance allowed for such widespread tranquility was, in itself, a soothing balm. The wind continued to moan, but its sound seemed to change, becoming less a threat and more a part of the lullaby that rocked the world to sleep. The beam swept across his window again, and this time he imagined it not just as a warning, but as a gentle reassurance to the slumbering village, a silent message that all was well, that the watch was being kept. The rhythm of the light became the rhythm of the sleeping world, a slow, steady breath in the dark. And as he held that image in his mind, the night itself began to feel different, as if the storm was finally acknowledging that its fury was no match for the quiet determination of the sleeping world and the light that watched over it. Almost imperceptibly at first, the character of the night began to shift. The wind, which had howled with such ferocious intent for hours, seemed to be losing its conviction. The deep-throated roar softened into a persistent, weary moan, and then gradually into a strong but manageable gust. The change was not sudden, but a slow, gracious retreat. The rain, which had been lashing the glass with such violence, softened its assault. The hard, pebble-like strikes became a gentle, steady patter, and then a misty drizzle. Elias noticed it when he climbed back up to the lantern room. The rattling against the panes had ceased, replaced by the soft, swishing sound of water running down the thick glass. He looked out. The world was still shrouded in darkness, but it was a different kind of dark now, a wet, gleaming dark instead of an angry, impenetrable one. The waves below were transforming as well. The terrifying crashing booms that shook the foundation gave way to a powerful, rhythmic swell. The sea was still mighty, but it was no longer chaotic. It was returning to its natural rolling motion, a giant breathing creature settling back into a deep slumber. High above, the solid blanket of cloud began to show its first signs of weakness. A patch of sky would momentarily thin, and the faint silver light of the moon would bleed through, illuminating the scene below in a ghostly transient glow. It was a promise of the calm to come, a hint of the order that lay behind the chaos. Elias took a deep breath, and the air felt different in his lungs, colder, cleaner, scoured by the passing storm. The tension that had held his shoulders rigid for hours began to ease. The worst was over. The lighthouse had stood firm, and the light had never faltered. A deep, quiet satisfaction settled over him. The hypnotic sweep of the beam was now cutting through a landscape of fading turbulence, its work feeling less like a desperate battle and more like a gentle guiding hand. The storm was subsiding, conceding the night to the steadfast rhythm of the light and the sea. The frantic energy of the watch was replaced by a patient, weary anticipation. The long vigil was nearing its end, and the darkness outside was no longer a hostile force, but simply the natural state of the world before the dawn. He stood there for a long time, watching the slow, graceful death of the tempest, feeling a kinship with the calming sea. His own inner turbulence settled along with the waves, leaving behind a profound and grateful stillness. The beam continued its arc, a solitary dancer in a ballroom that was finally growing quiet, its movements now graceful and sure against a backdrop of receding fury. The transition was gentle, almost seamless, as the remnants of the storm's anger bled away, leaving space for a new, softer presence to emerge on the eastern horizon. The darkness at the horizon began to soften. It was a change so subtle that at first Elias thought it might be a trick of his weary eyes, but as he watched, the solid black line separating the raging sea from the sky began to blur. It wasn't a color yet, not even a true gray, but a slight lessening of the absolute night, a dilution of the inkiness that had reigned for so many hours. It was the first hint that the world was still turning, that the long night was not eternal. As this faint lightning grew, its effect rippled upwards. The stars, which had been sharp, brilliant pinpricks in the clear patches of sky, began to lose their intensity. One by one, they faded, their light gently absorbed by the approaching dawn. The brightest ones held on the longest, but even they eventually surrendered, winking out as the sky slowly brightened from the bottom up. This gradual transformation changed the nature of his watch. The beam of the lighthouse, which had been a stark, brilliant slash against the utter blackness, now had to compete with the encroaching gloom. Its light became less severe, more integrated into the landscape. It no longer created a world of absolute light and absolute dark with each rotation. Instead, it swept across a sea that was now a deep, dark gray, its beam looking almost gentle as it illuminated the still formidable but now orderly swells. A deep weariness settled into Elias's bones, a physical weight that was the accumulation of the long night's tension and vigilance. It was a good weariness, an earned fatigue. Every muscle felt heavy, and his eyes were grainy from staring into the wind and the dark. Yet this weariness was accompanied by a profound sense of peace. The storm had passed, the light had done its duty, and the dawn was keeping its promise. He moved through the final routines of the watch with a slow, deliberate grace. He checked the oil level in the reservoir one more time, noting with satisfaction that there was still a good amount remaining. He listened to the clockwork mechanism, its hum steady and strong, a testament to his careful winding hours before. These small, comforting actions were the punctuation at the end of the night's long sentence. They signaled that his work was nearly complete, that the responsibility would soon shift from his shoulders to the rising sun. The approach of morning was not a sudden event, but a slow, gentle tide of light that washed over the world, bringing with it a quiet celebration of survival and the simple, profound relief of a task seen through to its end. The cold air of the lantern room felt fresh now, scoured clean by the departed storm, and each breath felt like a renewal. He stood at the glass, watching the world wake from its turbulent slumber, a silent participant in the daily miracle of dawn. The rhythm of the light began to feel like a countdown, each sweep bringing him closer to the moment he could finally rest, his own personal darkness giving way to the light of a new day. He performed one last check of the oil levels and the clockwork mechanism, his hands moving by pure muscle memory. Everything was in order. The machinery he tended with such care had performed flawlessly through the long, difficult night. The great beam continued its faithful arc, a silent, powerful stroke against the now calm sea. The water had lost its fury, settling into a deep, rhythmic swell that reflected the slowly brightening sky and patches of dull silver. Down in his quarters, the fire in the hearth had burned down to a bed of glowing embers. They pulsed with a soft orange light, their heat still radiating a gentle warmth into the circular room. A faint, sweet smell of wood smoke hung in the air, mixing with the crisp scent of the morning. The crackle was infrequent now, just a soft pop now and then as a pocket of sap surrendered to the heat. It was a sound of contentment, of a job well done. The keeper's work was nearly complete. The long vigil was over. A deep, quiet satisfaction filled him, a feeling that was as much a part of him as the salt on his skin. He had stood his watch. The light had burned steadily, a constant in the changing dark, a promise kept to the sea and to all who traveled upon it. He took a final look out at the horizon, where the line between sea and sky was now a clear, soft gray. There was a profound peace in this moment, standing between the fading night and the emerging day, between the dimming embers of his fire and the growing light of the sun. He felt a connection to all the keepers who had stood in this very spot at the end of their own long nights, sharing this same quiet triumph. The beam swept across the water one last time under his watchful eye, and as it passed, it seemed to acknowledge the coming dawn, its light no longer a desperate defiance, but a gentle greeting to the new day. He watched until the first sliver of the sun itself broke the horizon, a line of brilliant gold that set the edge of the world on fire. The light of the lighthouse, so powerful in the darkness, was now rendered humble by the sheer magnitude of the sunrise. Its work was done. The steady light could finally rest as its keeper could finally rest, their shared duty fulfilled until the next nightfall. The rhythm of the waves, the fading glow of the embers, and the memory of the sweeping beam wove together into a single, tranquil feeling of completion. The light continues its steady rhythm against the now calm sea, a silent guardian in the growing dawn. The fire crackles softly as the story winds down, its warmth a final comfort. Let the sounds of the waves and the embers guide you now into a deep and restful sleep. The beam sweeps on, a constant in the changing dark, a promise of peace. If this journey to the 18th century lighthouse brought you tranquility, consider subscribing for more voyages into quiet historical moments. Sweet dreams. The light continues its steady rhythm against the now calm sea, a silent guardian in the growing dawn. The fire crackles softly as the story winds down, its warmth a final comfort. Let the sounds of the waves and the embers guide you now into a deep and restful sleep. The beam sweeps on, a constant in the changing dark, a promise of peace. If this journey to the 18th century lighthouse brought you tranquility, consider subscribing for more voyages into quiet historical moments. Sweet dreams. The waves are a gentle, rhythmic swell now, a soft lullaby for the soul. The fire is just embers, glowing softly, pulsing with a gentle heat. The light sweeps on, a distant comforting blink in the early morning haze. The waves just a whisper against the shore. The embers, a quiet, warm glow. The light, a steady, distant pulse. The waves, a soft sigh. The embers, a faint warmth. The light, a memory of vigilance. The waves, a gentle breath. The embers, a fading glow. The light, a distant star.